Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to listen to the IAEM certification webinar series. And this series is on professional contributions. My name is Pam LaRue, and I'm joined by Ed Smith, who's actually down in the Caribbean, someplace on an island helping. And we look forward to hearing from you. If you have any questions, we'll try to go through the presentation. But we do, if you something you don't understand or need clarification on, please ask. And having said that, the information contained within this webinar series presented as of today's date. And remember, requirements and sometimes certification application forms are subject to change, like everything else. But as of today, everything is current. So, Mr. Smith, would you like to begin, sir?
Thank you very much. As Pam said, I'm Ed Smith. I'm currently in Puerto Rico doing some training for FEMA, and it's a pleasure for me to join this webinar because as a commissioner of the CEM, it's very often the professional contributions are the areas that causes shortfalls in people's applications. And I think that if we have an opportunity to go through the shortfalls that we see, I think it'll make it much more obvious to you how you can put together a successful application. To meet the requirement for professional contributions, you have to provide 6 different contributions, and they have to have occurred during the last 10 years. That's very important. The key, and I will tell you, if you've been in the emergency management field for very long, you know that the key to success is documentation, and it's the same for the CEM program. When you deal with providing the information that's required for your 6 different contributions, documentation and independent verification for those particular contributions is what is going to determine success or failure in your application. As you can see, there are a lot of options for you to go through. We're going to go through all of these, but you need to provide 6 different contributions. And that's important that they're different. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But frankly, you need to pick 6, and I always recommend to folks that I mentor, pick 7 or even 8 and submit an extra 1 or 2, just in case one of your contributions is not accepted. Generally, contributions are not accepted, not because they don't meet a standard, but most often they're not accepted because the documentation, the verification is not sufficient. So having said that, let's go on to the first area, membership. Okay, we pretty much talked about the documentation. I jumped ahead a little bit, but documentation is so very, very important. The verification needs to happen, and the verification needs to be independent. In other words, you can't do your own verification that you were a member for 3 years for the first one, membership for 3 years in a disaster emergency management related organization. Some organizations are very obvious. Organizations like IAEM, NEMA, the National Emergency Managers Association, and some other specifically related to emergency management organizations. If the organization that you're talking about, that you are a member of, is not as obvious as some of the other ones, then you need to provide a copy of the vision or the mission statement that supports the fact that this organization is related to comprehensive emergency management. Very often the proof that you're going to provide is either a membership certificate for 3 separate years, or a letter or an email from the organization's leadership to show that you were in fact a member for those years. It doesn't have to be the same organization. It can be membership in more than one organization, but it can't be 3 organizations for the same year. Okay, I hope that's clear. In other words, you could submit 3 years from IAEM or NEMA or another organization, 3 separate years within the last 10 years. Or you could submit 1 year from IAM, 1 year from NEMA, 1 year from another organization, but you can't submit the same year. In other words, if you are only a member of all of those organizations in 2018, then you have to submit separate years. I hope that's clear, because that becomes an issue fairly often. So if you're using one organization, that's very easy. You just need 3 separate years within the 10-year period. It becomes a little more complicated if you use different organizations, but really not all that much. Again, that providing acceptable proof is what will make it successful for you when we evaluate your application, your packet. Okay, next slide, please. Professional conferences, this is an area that I really want to emphasize one thing. You would not believe how many times we evaluate a packet, an application, and the person submits conference participation, but not for a total of 40 contact hours. The key here is it doesn't have to be one 40-hour conference, obviously, but if it's multiple conferences, the total cumulative time has to be 40 contact hours. So very often when you get a certificate from a conference, it shows the contact hours. If it doesn't show the contact hours, then we as the commission are going to grant you 6 contact hours per day for your participation in that conference. So in order to prove that you have, or to verify that you've attended the conference, you have to provide some a conference certificate or a letter from an independent source stating that you did attend it. The key there is to provide a detailed timeline of the activities. If we can't tell from your verification how many days or hours it was, that's not going to meet the requirement, because we have to be able to have you document that you did attend for a total of at least 40 contact hours. Again, training courses don't count. These are conferences and workshops. And if it appears, or if the workshop, sometimes workshops are training workshops, this, we're probably not going to give credit for if it looks like it's training as opposed to an actual conference. So that's the thing to remember. Okay, next slide. Service role is a very interesting contribution, and it really is a contribution to the field of emergency management. If you can look at that slide, and it tells you various examples of things that will meet the requirements: serving on a board of directors, a committee, a task force. A special project can be interpreted several ways. Special project sometimes can be used for a special assignment, and we'll talk about that a little later. But the key is that there has to be a service role. And more importantly, it has to be in support of emergency management. Comprehensive emergency management is the key to all of this, because that's what we're looking for, contributions to the field of emergency management. Acceptable proof, independent verification by, it could be by your supervisor, it could be by an official of the organization that you're serving in, but it has to relate to comprehensive emergency management, and we like to have a timeline. We need to be able to tell what was the time of the service. One of the reasons we need that is we need to ensure that it was in the 10 years that we're talking about. It has to be within the last 10 years, and service on a board of directors or a committee for something that lasts a couple of weeks or a month is going to be a little difficult to accept as a contribution, while as service for a year as a committee member, a task force member makes it much clearer. So that timeline is also important. I see a question here regarding the membership, and it asks, does being a member of staff of a national disaster office, is that acceptable? And really, what's going to determine if it's acceptable or not is the actual charter of that organization. I would say, I'm not familiar with that, but based on the name, it probably is. But again, the key is going to be for anyone that's not obviously acceptable, the key to success is to submit documentation that shows the charter or the vision of that particular organization, so that we can determine that it is related to emergency management. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, well, while we're waiting for the slide to change, let me just talk to you about something overall, an issue that sometimes come up, because it has to be, as we said earlier, 6 separate contributions. That becomes important because of something that Pam's going to talk about in a little while, called other. So other is a category that can include a lot of different things. But if it looks like that other that you submitted is actually a service role or a leadership role, and you've already been granted credit for that service role or the leadership role, then you're not going to get credit for that other, because of the fact that it has to be 6 separate contributions. And I'm sure Pam will talk about that more when we go. Leadership role can be very similar to the service role, except that it requires you serve in a leadership position in that same group of categories that we talked about: board of directors, a board committee, a task force. Again, we use task force for service role, but in this case, you have to show that you're in a leadership role in that task force, not just that you're a member, but that you are actually one of the leaders of that. Again, we need a timeline for that service. We need a timeline that you were in that leadership role. And obviously, as we talk about in every one of these, you need to have provide independent verification. Again, a letter from your supervisor, a letter from whoever appointed you to that leadership role, is something that needs to be forwarded with your application. Again, as all of these, they have to be related to comprehensive emergency management. Okay, next slide, please. Special assignment, I mentioned a little bit earlier, but involvement in a special assignment and it can be for your, for the the company or for the organization that you work for. It doesn't have to be for an outside organization. So given a special assignment that contributes to comprehensive emergency management, that has provides or produces a product that's helpful for emergency management or disaster management, then that will qualify. I say it, it will qualify assuming that you provide the independent verification and the timeline. Again, the timeline's important because we need to determine that it was within the time period that we're looking at, the 10 years prior to the application. The resulting products, are important. If you show what the special assignment produced, that's very effective. But again, just producing a product or just providing the product isn't really going to meet the requirement. To meet the requirement, you have to provide that independent verification of that, what you did in that special assignment. It's very often the downfall for people is that they provide a product, a work product, something that was produced in this special assignment. But if you don't have that independent verification to show that you were responsible for it or that you had played a role in that special assignment, then it's not going to be acceptable. And it doesn't mean that it won't eventually be acceptable, but it's not going to be acceptable until that independent verification is received by the commission. Okay, thank you. Speaking is an area that we often have, often find shortfalls because you have to, in order to meet this contribution, you have to develop and participate in 3 separate presentations or panels, okay? And it can be through any media. It can be radio, television, an actual presentation to a group. And it just has to be, you have to have 3 separate incidents of speaking. For most of you, that's not going to be an issue at all. Generally, emergency managers or people who work in the comprehensive emergency management field speak frequently to other groups or to groups within their organization. But Frank, again, that providing the independent verification of those is important. Very often, providing a thank you letter that you receive from the organization that you were speaking to is a very good way to prove that you did it. Providing an agenda that shows you as a speaker is not generally acceptable. It can be part of the documentation that you submit, but being on an agenda doesn't necessarily mean that you actually did do the speaking that was indicated. So something that shows what you're doing is fine, as long as you provide something that shows that you actually did it. Again, that's that independent verification. And again, you have to have 3 presentations or panels. It can't be just one long presentation. It has to be 3 separate events. Okay? Okay. This is the last slide that I'm going to talk about, and then I'll be glad to answer any other questions that come up. But teaching is a very good contribution because there's nothing, I think, that contributes more to a profession than teaching people within the profession. You actually have to produce a formal or documentation to show that you did a formal teaching or instruction, And really teaching and instruction, we don't make a divide there, but you have to show that it was related to disaster emergency management. And it has to be 3 hours of actual platform instruction. Again, it can be an hour if you are participating in a workshop or something, and you teach 3 blocks within that, as long as it totals 3 hours of actual platform instruction. So if you teach a college class, for instance, and you provide the documentation to show that, obviously that's going to meet the requirement. Again, as I said earlier, just providing an agenda or a course syllabus doesn't meet the requirement because it doesn't show that you actually did what that document says you did. You need something to show what you did and something to show that you actually performed that. Providing a contract to do something is not going to be acceptable unless you provide a documentation to show that you fulfilled that contract, that you actually did teach those courses. So I have another questions about participation or membership in VOADs or COADs, and those are voluntary agencies active in disasters, or those certainly can count, and sometimes they're counted not as membership but as an other or as a service role. So it really depends a lot on how you write that up as to how it's going to be credited to you. The commissioners will try to ensure that it fits, and very often we'll move it to an area where it fits better. But membership in a VOAD certainly would be in a service role, would be acceptable for a service role. Now, for a membership role, it really depends on the time and how much time, how long you've been a member. And again, it goes back to what is the job of that particular organization? What is their mission? What is their vision? Okay. Again, the key for teaching is, again, to provide documentation that you taught a course, a class, or a seminar on a topic that was related to disaster and emergency management. 3 hours total. Okay? Pam, go ahead.
Thank you, Ed. The next slide is on course development. And again, course development being the word you've got to remember. It means you actually played a significant role in the development of either an revision or a beginning manual, anything that has to do with educational emergency management courses that are at least 3 hours in length. It doesn't mean you can design the tornado on the front page only. It means you've got to put in there all about the tornado itself. So playing a significant role, and what would be considered, acceptable proof? Well, again, independent verification by somebody has said, your supervisor most likely. John Smith was the course developer in the new mission support for tornadoes, blah, 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 whatever. PowerPoints alone are not acceptable. Anybody can do the PowerPoint, beg, borrow, and steal from each other. That's what emergency managers do. But what you actually have to do is provide not only a PowerPoint or the syllabi, but you've also got to have a letter that says, yes, you actually did do it. And the best way to do that would be from your supervisor. And again, it's that significant role, not that you were one of 25 people and it was only a 3-hour course, but more like you were 1 or 2 people that did the development of a course. Publications. It means you publish an article. Now, it could be an emergency management article, it could be a disaster article, it could be something that's been done on a research project. What you've got to remember, though, is the article, it has to be an independent editorial review and must be published in a document beyond your control. IAEM has the IAEM bulletin that everybody reads. That is a perfect place to do a publication. 4 times a year, there's always a special edition. You know in advance what the articles can be on. And if you're looking for a way to get one of those 6 contributions, writing an article in the bulletin is a great way to do it. Again, acceptable proof. Well, when you get to see your name printed in an article in the bulletin, that's really good proof. Again, publication on an online periodical other than us. If you can see something in several of the other publications that are out in the field, you must provide a copy that's clear documentation about the publisher. So again, if you were to use one that's sort of internal to us, it very clearly states the title and the author's name. And again, Sharon and Kate and Chelsea are very good at verifying as well. So I'm not saying you have to use our documentation or our internal publication source, but it really comes in handy because it's one that you all have access to, which makes it even easier to use. Audio, visual, and interactive products. Okay, develop content for distributed emergency management video, computer-aided software. You have to be a participant and you must have played a significant role. Okay, maybe it's a 4-minute YouTube video on preparedness. Maybe it's a 2-minute video on evacuation. And again, I just use YouTube because apparently if you're the younger set, you know how to use YouTube. I personally could not do it. But it gives you a way to promote something in emergency management that if you have the smarts to do it, it's out there for you to do. What we consider, though, is acceptable proof is that there has to be a submission to the link. For you just to say, well, I did a video on YouTube on preparedness and don't provide me with a link is not going to help. It's also not going to help if you said, well, the link was up for 2 days or the link was up for 4 days and they pulled it. Well, first of all, I don't know who they is. And if it's only up for 4 days, it probably wasn't meant to be up in the first place. And again, I'm not just saying YouTube. It could be any sort of a emergency management video that can be distributed. It could be something where you might decide that you're basically going to do it for your town on how to use a fire extinguisher. It can be anything that you want to have somebody, do a movie. I guess now it would just be on your video camera. You could actually on your phone, you could do a 2-minute video on how to use a fire extinguisher. But it just has to be validated participation, and you must be the major role player, I guess, would be in it. Again, PowerPoint presentations are not acceptable. The link by itself is not all the supporting document we need, but it's good. If you can have somebody certify that you've done this, whether it be the city, state, your county official, your town manager say, yes, that you did do a video on preparedness and then actually give you the link on it. It's just verifying that you actually did do it. And it comes in handy to say, yes, this was actually done and it's very interactive. Awards, special recognition. Receive an award for disaster or emergency management related activities. What we mean is something out of the ordinary. We don't just mean letter of appreciation because you've been around for 300 of the 340 days, but something for the ice storm. You did 20-hour days for 3 weeks, something that's really the town, the community, the county, IAEM. Somebody is saying, hey, attaboy, it's a pat on the back for doing a good job. You've received an award for some sort of a related activity to either disasters or emergency management. What would be an acceptable? Well, first of all, a picture of the award is great. It could be a copy of it, or it could be a letter which describes what the award was for. Again, it should be for disaster or emergency management, not because you're the best ballet dancer or that you could run the 10K in 22 hours. It has to be related actually to emergency management in some way. Having said award, it's truly to be exceptional. If you were to get a letter from the governor of your state saying, thank you for all you've done in the past months flooding, and you've gone out of your way, this is above and beyond, that is something that's not the norm. Not everybody in town is getting it. It's something that's directed to you. Anytime we see an award that says, without a name, to somebody, to everyone, that to me is not the intent of what this certification means. It's not a special recognition to you yourself. It's to a bunch of people. So it's not the intent of this. The intent is for you as an individual getting something special, that recognition that says you've done good. So we just try to make sure that it's not one of those blanket awards that goes to everybody. Certification related to emergency management. This is a very complicated one. Basically, it seems like it's easy. Earned certification as an emergency manager through a government agency, state, province, tribal association, or professional association, such as, receiving a FEMA PDS, APS, professional continuity, practitioner, AEM, CEM. Again, do not qualify under this category, if you can see that. What this is a certification as an emergency manager through a government agency. So one of the things, and if you will look over on the other side, this is where it gets very nitpicky. Acceptable proofs are the copy of the certification, information about the certifying organization, description of the certification requirements, must contain a CEU, continuing education unit requirement, and a term of expiration. One of the ones we see quite a bit are, well, I'm an FCO, Federal Coordinating Officer. There's no CEUs involved, and there's no terms of expiration. That would not count. So it has to be something that has requirements for studying, for learning something, and there has to be a term of expiration. Technical certifications not related to comprehensive emergency management also may not be accepted, such as an EMTA or an EMTB. Another one that might not be required is bomb technician. So you're looking to have something that is certified through a government agency or a professional association. So if you're thinking of something that you might have and you look at it and say, okay, Pam, now I have my CEMME, which is my certification from Maine, but that's because I have to keep up my trainings. I have to make some contributions, and it expires every 5 years, so I have to keep on top of it. Then I know that there's the good possibility that that is acceptable. So as long as you know there's a term of expiration, that you have to, because you have to keep up with the qualifications. Legislative contact. All right, here's where you're contacting somebody, whether it be county commissioners, whether it be your U.S. senator, your U.S. representative. There's something that you're contacting an elected official at the national, regional, tribal, or local government level regarding an emergency management issue. You know, dear Senator Collins, I really request that you support EMPG funding. The best part is you're hoping Senator Collins is going to send you back something that says, dear Pamela, thank you. Yes, I will support EMPG funding. I've contacted her. She's contacted me. So again, a one-way conversation doesn't really count. If you send something and you don't even get an automatic reply back. So when we are talking about tips to make sure that if you've covered it, an acceptable proof should include a copy of the initial correspondence, what you sent. So you want to prove that you sent something, and then a copy of the reply. And it really is nice if your reply is more than automatic reply received. If it actually says something. I always try to make sure that when I send something to an elected official, that is something they've actually had in the paper recently, and they've always made a comment back, especially if it's close to election time. It has worked in the past. I'm not saying it'll work in the future, but usually they're more apt to actually make a comment back to you if it's close to election time. So that's a good time to send something. And it's an easy way to get a contribution marked off. Conducting research. If you play a significant being the word here, role in the development and execution of an emergency management research project. All right, so there's something you think that people need to follow up on. We know right now that there's probably people in Puerto Rico that are doing research on the deaths. We know how that's become a big issue. Well, again, if somebody can find an acceptable proof that a copy of what the research project is, independent verification that you played a role in the development and execution of the project. So again, it could be something about ways to evacuate on a one-lane highway. How do you do it? Do you have boats? So whatever it is, you have to make sure that you're playing a significant role in the development and the execution. A title page is not going to just cut it by itself. And again, if you're one of 185 people, you've got to make sure that you're defined as where in that 185 people you're doing your portion. If you have, page 1 through 100 of that paper is yours, and the other 3 pages are the rest of the 184 people, then you're covered. So you just want to make sure that you're able to give proof that it is something that is basically something that you've been involved with in playing more than just a minor role. And again, a copy of the project, and then verification. And normally that would come from a supervisor or an official in some capacity, whether it be local, county, or state, or even federal. Other, as explained earlier, others can be a multitude of anything else. One that really struck my fancy, I guess, a couple of years ago when I was reviewing a CEM packet, is the fact that this was a Cub Scout troop leader, and his 10 Cub Scouts all got their badge in preparedness. And apparently it was the first time it had been done. But what made it is he actually showed the projects that they had to do. He showed a picture of them all getting their badge, that he went above and beyond to make sure that it wasn't other contribution. It could be EMAC. Okay, we know that they're looking for people to go to some place where there might be flooding, but they're just looking for state people to go, and you're saying, hey, my state's not involved, I'd love to go help out. So you're volunteering to go to another state to do something. That could qualify, as long as there's someone that's going to be able to verify that, yes, you did go, yes, you did assist in the emergency management, whatever you did. That could be an acceptable contribution. Again, it comes down to the verification of what the role was, your timeline, the impact on emergency management, and that it actually was significant contribution to emergency management. Could they have done it without you? Yes, but probably not as good, because it's still one less person. If you're unsure, as Ed said earlier, or you can always put in 7 where you need to have 6. You can always add an extra one. There are things out there, and I'm trying to think off the top of my head, anything that doesn't fit in one of the other categories. So there's probably many things out there that could fit into it, but you have to make that determination. It's something we might not have done. I went to a different town to help an emergency manager once because he had a tornado, small tornado in the state of Maine. It was an EF0, but it affected his town, not mine. So the county director called and said, hey, Pam, can you go over and sit in his EOC while he goes and surveys his town? So I did. So that to me would qualify as another. I did something I normally wouldn't do, and his selectman wrote a letter and said it for me that I went and assisted while he went out on the road. So it's things you don't normally think about, but it's something you have done that should be considered, but it doesn't fit in one of the other categories. So, and I'm sure, you know, you can always call and ask. There is the information email, and we'll get into that soon. Again, pitfalls: incomplete, sloppy, out of order application. To be honestly truthful, read. You need to read the instructions. When we say the pitfalls, that is the biggest fallback, I believe. It says people do not read the entire instructions. You know, when it says 3 hours, when it says 3 times, when it says 3 years, you know, if people would read, we wouldn't send it back. Lack of signature, something so simple as a lack of a signature could return an application. Lack of independent validation of claims. Again, a leadership role contribution must not be part of a normal job duties. It's something above and beyond. Double dipping. You can't count the same accomplishment twice. Okay, so if I'm in a leadership role, that means I also shouldn't be able to use it as other because I'm in that same leadership role. You can't use the same title for 2 different things. Again, IAEM is proud to introduce the featured mentor program. Find your mentor, earn your certification, get certified in 2012. By earning your AEM, CEM, it's more achievable with the guidance of a qualified mentor, plus you're helping them recertify. Anytime you can get one of those little boxes checked, it's a step forward. Again, you can search by sector, by expertise, by location to find out who might be a mentor that is good for you. And how do you do it? You can go to, at the bottom, you'll see where it says find your mentor at IAEM.com, Mentors.ca. CFM. Charlie Francis Michael. And I'm sure those probably aren't the correct initials, but it's easy for me to say that and you understand with my main accent. Again, get in touch, contact us. Candidates may reach out to current certification commissioners to ask questions. And it'll give you the IEM page that you can go to. You can also contact a featured mentor, and it will give you the website as well, or the email address as well. And again, you can always contact IEM headquarters in Falls Church, Virginia. They have a telephone number, they have an email address, and of course, we're always on Facebook. We're on Twitter. And we have our website, IAEM.com. And as I've been talking, I haven't looked to see if there's any questions, but I see it blinking, so bear with me for just a moment. I serve on the State's Corporation for National Community Service, Emergency Management Rep. Will this qualify for the service role requirement? I serve on the state. Without looking at it, I believe it would. What I would recommend is to go back to the IAEM website under certification and pull up the service role and pull up the leadership role, and you'll be able to read what it actually says. Every contribution actually has a really nice paragraph on the what is and what isn't, more than what we've actually gone through here, that you can actually say, okay, it says that, yes, this means I can do it, or no, I can't do it. Okay, the next, should you only use leadership role of an X organization and not use membership of the same organization? No, you can. Yes, you can. That is not double dipping. If you are a member of a professional organization, that can count as a membership. As long as you pay your dues, that is fine. Because have I been a member of IAM for many years? Yes, I have. Have I been the president of IAM USA? Yes, I have. Did I use that the year I was the national president for leadership? Yes, I did. But it wasn't double dipping because it was above and beyond. There were two separate categories. It wasn't saying that I'm using my leadership in the membership role. So that one is yes, you can do it. Do podcast counts? Do podcast counts as what? What did you want it? I don't understand quite the question. Will a conference attendance requirement and speaking at a segment of the conference meet both requirements? And will a presentation suffice as support for verification? If you are going to a conference and you have your conference certificate that says you spent 40 hours at the conference, that will count correctly. If you are speaking at that conference and it's in addition to the 40 hours you've gotten the credit for going to the conference, and it can be validated that you spoke for X amount of time and it can be signed off on, then yes, you can get credit. If that speaking time itself, though, is included in that conference time, you would take out that time. Will a presentation suffice as support? Just the presentation itself, no. Somebody still needs to validate it, because I could have done a PowerPoint presentation back in 2002 and try to use it today, and I would need to have it be validated, and that is not within the past 10 years. Now, this presentation today, could I use this as, if I needed somebody to validate this for me toward a speaking engagement, because it's not 3 hours, but I would need to have the presentation plus validation from someone. So you need to still have another proof that it actually did happen today. And do podcasts count? If you can give us the information from the podcast, how long, the intended audience, what was discussed, are you the only speaker, and give the specifics of it, and somebody can verify that it was actually done, then yes, it should count. And it might count under other. The other category would be a good category to count it under. Hopefully I've been able to answer all the questions. Ed, is there anything else that you can add, sir, that I've forgotten? Because you know I am old.
No, I think that the key thing to remember is that independent verification. Very often a presentation, just supplying the presentation or just a link to a podcast is great supporting documentation. But the independent verification to show what your role was or that you actually did something is what we find missing very often. So I did see another question that says on the presentations, can the 3 presentations be separate location on the same topic? Absolutely. It doesn't matter that it's different topics. You can do that same presentation to 3 different groups, but you need to have independent verification from each one of those groups that you actually did the presentation. So it doesn't have to be different presentations. It just has to be 3 different times that you actually present that presentation.
Thank you. And I did see one other question that says, would meeting minutes indicate you spoke suffice? And again, meeting minutes, I guess if the meeting minutes said Pam LaRue spoke for 30 minutes on preparedness or hurricane recovery, and it was dated and signed, and you saw that in the minutes, would I take that? Yes, I would take that, because that is a verifiable means, because Ed Smith wrote an email to 25 people that said, I spoke for 30 minutes, 25 minutes, whatever. So to me, I would count that yes. If you could also give, some notes on it or what was said or a brief, it just substantiates it more. But that would count because it has been written by someone else. Somebody was able to document it that you did speak.
I see there's another question regarding webinars and do they count? And webinars are a great way to do presentations. So for a presentation, a webinar that's properly documented would count. If you're talking about producing an audiovisual product, a webinar, again, if it's a properly documented, your role in developing that and producing that webinar, that can count as well. It can't count for both things, obviously. And again, the key is the proper documentation to show what your role was. Thank you.
I think we have covered them all now. If I haven't, I apologize. I'm going through them fast right now, and it looks like we've covered everything. If not, you can send them forward to the CEM@IAEM, and we'll be glad to get the information back to you. Other than that, I do want to thank you for your participation today and listening while Ed and I spoke. I know sometimes that's not all entertaining to do, but hopefully nobody fell asleep, because remember, the outcome is helping you get your CEM, which we'd all like to see you be able to do today. We do want to thank you for taking the time. I know it's to sit for an hour and listen to someone else talk is sometimes hard to do, so we really appreciate it. And Mr. Smith, anything else would you like to say?
No, I think, well, I say no, but the one thing that I would repeat is read the requirement. If it says 40 hours, submit 40 hours. If it says 3 presentations, submit documentation for 3 presentations. And that might seem very simple and very obvious, but very often we have packets that are incomplete because someone submitted 26 hours of conference time, or somebody submitted 1 presentation. So read the requirements. And the last thing I would have to say is, if you know a CEM, ask a CEM, ask them for help. You know, as Pam said earlier, when people go to recertify, it's not a contribution that's available to you, but as people are recertifying 5 years down the road, one of their available contributions is mentoring another CEM, so another applicant. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Thanks.
And thank you very much. This concludes the webinar. I don't know if the IAEM, CEM advisors can chime in now if they have anything they want to say.